The world didn't end all at once. It unraveled, quietly, slowly, until everything familiar faded into memory. In the silence that followed, survival became instinct, and trust became a risk few were willing to take. This is a story about what remains when everything else is gone, when two strangers meet in the ruins of a dying world and must decide whether risking their lives is worth risking their hearts. The world had not ended in fire. It ended in silence. Cities still stood, skeletal towers of glass and rust piercing dull gray skies. But they were hollow things now. Mausoleums for a civilization that had once been loud with traffic, laughter, arguments drifting from apartment windows, music pulsing through crowded streets. Now the only sounds were wind moving through broken buildings and the distant groan of collapsing steel. And sometimes, footsteps. Most of the people who survived the collapse traveled alone. Trust had become the rarest resource left in the world. Food could be scavenged, water could be filtered, shelter could be improvised. But trust? Trust could get you killed. Rowan Hale had lived alone for nearly 4 years. At 29, he looked closer to 40. A thin scar ran across the bridge of his nose and disappeared into a beard that had grown unevenly over weeks without a mirror. His dark hair was tied loosely at the back of his neck, though loose strands constantly slipped free and fell across tired gray eyes that never stopped scanning the horizon. Everything about him carried the posture of survival. The way he walked without making sound. The way he paused before stepping through any doorway. The way his hand hovered near the knife strapped to his thigh. His clothing had been gathered from a dozen abandoned places. Military canvas pants, a faded red flannel jacket, gloves with the fingertips cut away for better grip. His backpack was carefully organized, every item placed with purpose and precision. After years of wandering, Rowan lived by 2 rules. Never stay in one place long enough to be found, and never trust anyone long enough to care. On a cold afternoon beneath a pale, colorless sky, Rowan moved carefully through the skeletal remains of a highway overpass outside the ruins of a city that had long ago lost its name. The concrete had fractured and tilted over the years, vines creeping through cracks where rainwater had slowly carved paths into the road. Rusted vehicles sat abandoned where they had died long ago. Doors open, windows shattered, tires melted flat against the pavement. Rowan moved between them like a shadow, scavenging, always scavenging. The world had become a graveyard of useful things. Inside an overturned delivery truck, he found something that almost made him laugh. 3 cans of peaches. For a long moment, he simply stared at the faded labels, brushing dust away with his thumb. Before the collapse, peaches had been ordinary, something you grabbed from a grocery store shelf without thinking. Now they were treasure. He slipped them carefully into his bag, and that was when he heard it. Footsteps. Rowan froze. The sound came from beneath the bridge. Light, careful, measured. Someone who knew how to move quietly, which meant someone dangerous. Slowly, Rowan crouched behind a rusted sedan and listened, his hand sliding toward the knife on his thigh. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. Whoever it was knew he was there. Then a voice spoke, soft, calm. "I'm not here to hurt you." Rowan said nothing. The voice continued. "There's no point pretending we don't hear each other." A pause. Then, "I just want to pass through." Rowan slowly rose from behind the car. Across the cracked roadway, near the shadow of the bridge's concrete supports, stood a woman. She looked about 26. maybe 27. Her coat was long and dark, patched at the elbows. A worn backpack hung over one shoulder, and a rifle rested loosely in her hands, not aimed, but ready. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a messy braid that hung over one shoulder. Strands had escaped and framed a face that carried both softness and exhaustion. But it was her eyes that caught Rowan's attention, clear gray, alert, not desperate. Which meant she wasn't starving. That made her more dangerous. They stood facing each other across 30 feet of cracked pavement. Two strangers in a dead world, neither willing to blink first. Finally, Rowan spoke. Name? His voice sounded rough from disuse. The woman tilted her head slightly. Mara. Her eyes studied him. You? Rowan hesitated. Names were dangerous. Names meant memories. Memories meant attachments. But refusing would make things worse. Rowan? Mara nodded once. A quiet acknowledgement. Nice to meet you, she said. Neither of them smiled. Wind swept dust across the highway. After a moment, Mara shifted her weight slightly. I'm heading west, she said. If you want this road, I'll take another route. Rowan frowned slightly. Most survivors didn't offer that. Most tried to intimidate, threaten, or ambush. Why? He asked. Her expression didn't change. Because if we start fighting, one of us dies. She gave a small shrug. And I'd rather not. That answer surprised him. Rowan studied her carefully. Her boots were worn but well-maintained. Her rifle was clean. Her posture balanced. She wasn't desperate. She was experienced. Which meant she had survived a long time. Which meant she had probably killed people. Just like he had. Rowan glanced toward the horizon. Heavy clouds were gathering. Acid rain. If you were caught outside when it started, the burns could kill you slowly. There's a storm coming? Rowan said. Mara followed his gaze toward the sky. Yeah, she said quietly. Silence returned. Then Rowan spoke again. There's an old subway station 2 miles east. Her eyes shifted back to him. You offering shelter? Temporary, he said quickly. Separate sides. No weapons drawn. She studied him carefully. You trust me that much? No, Rowan said. But the rain will kill us both if we stay out here. Mara looked at the sky again, then at him. Finally, she nodded. Temporary. And just like that, two strangers began walking together through the ruins of the world. The subway entrance was half buried beneath collapsed buildings and creeping vegetation. Rowan had discovered it months earlier. One of many temporary shelters scattered along the wandering routes he followed through the broken cities. They descended the cracked stairs cautiously. The air below smelled of damp stone and rust, but it was dry, safe from the coming rain. Rowan lit a small lantern, its soft glow pushing back the darkness. Mara sat against the far wall, exactly as agreed. Opposite sides, distance between them, weapons within reach. An hour later, the storm arrived. Rain hammered the broken city above. Through cracks in the ceiling, thin streams of water trickled down the walls. But they were safe. For now. Rowan reached into his bag and pulled out one of the cans of peaches. He hesitated. Food was life. Sharing it was dangerous. But something about the silence between them felt strange. Different. He tossed the can across the floor. It slid to a stop near Mara's boot. She looked down at it, then up at him. You serious? Rowan shrugged. 3 cans. I can spare one. Mara studied the label. Her lips curved slightly. Peaches. She opened it carefully with a small knife. The sweet smell filled the station. For a moment, neither of them spoke as they tasted something that reminded them of the world before. You always share food with strangers? She asked. No. Then why now? Rowan leaned back against the wall. I got tired of eating alone. Mara didn't answer. But something in her eyes softened. The storm kept them trapped underground for hours. Conversation came slowly. Fragments at first, careful questions, measured answers. Rowan had once been an engineer. Bridges, transit systems, infrastructure. When the collapse began with pandemics and wars and failing power grids, he had spent months trying to keep things running. Until the systems failed anyway. Until everything failed. Mara had been 2 years from finishing medical school. When hospitals overflowed and governments collapsed, medicine had slowly transformed into triage. Then survival. Then something darker. You still help people? Rowan asked. Sometimes. Why? Her answer came quietly. Because if I stop, the world really is dead. Rowan looked at her differently after that. The attack came in the middle of the night. 3 men, scavengers who had seen the lantern light. Rowan woke to the crunch of glass. Mara was already moving, her rifle fired. The sound exploded through the tunnel. One attacker dropped instantly, another rushed forward with a knife. Rowan met him halfway. Steel clashed in the lantern glow as they struggled. Rowan drove his blade into the man's side. The third attacker fled into the darkness. Silence slowly returned, except for their breathing. Mara lowered her rifle. Rowan wiped blood from his hands. After a moment, she said quietly, "Still think trusting strangers is a good idea?" Rowan gave a tired laugh. "Still alive, aren't we?" Morning sunlight filtered through cracks in the ruins above. Dust danced in the golden beams. For a moment, the world almost looked peaceful. Rowan packed his bag. Mara did the same. They stood near the subway entrance where 2 roads split in opposite directions. "This is where we split," Rowan said. Mara nodded, but she didn't move. Instead, she asked, "Where are you really going?" Rowan hesitated. Then he said it. "There's supposed to be a settlement near the coast." "Rumors." "Yeah." She studied him carefully, then adjusted her backpack. "West is that direction." Rowan blinked. "You said you were heading west." "I was." A small smile appeared. "Guess I still am." Weeks passed. Traveling together became easier than either of them expected. Rowan built fires. Mara treated wounds. They scavenged ruined cities and crossed empty highways. They fought. They survived. Together. Trust didn't arrive all at once. It grew in small moments. Sharing the last water, standing watch so the other could sleep, laughing at something stupid in the middle of a dead city. One evening, they stood atop the remains of a collapsed skyscraper, watching the sun bleed red across the broken horizon. Mara leaned against a twisted railing. "You know what scares me most," she said. Rowan glanced at her. "What?" "That we might actually make it." He frowned. "Why would that scare you?" She looked at him. Because surviving meant something dangerous. Hope. "If the world starts again," she said quietly, "people will start hurting each other again too." Rowan thought about that. Then he said softly, "Maybe." A pause. "But maybe they'll love each other too." Mara looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. In a world built on ruins, love had found a place to grow. Fragile, dangerous, but real. And for the first time since the collapse, neither of them felt alone. The road west seemed to stretch forever. Ruins lay scattered across the landscape like the bones of a civilization that had died slowly. Cities had collapsed inward, their towers bent and shattered. Highways had cracked apart and disappeared beneath weeds and young forests slowly reclaiming the land. But Rowan and Mara kept walking. together. 3 weeks had passed since the night they sheltered in the subway station. 3 weeks since two strangers had shared a can of peaches and discovered that loneliness had become heavier than fear. 3 weeks since strangers had become something far more complicated. Trust. Rowan walked ahead along a broken stretch of highway, his boots scraping softly against loose gravel. His shoulders remained slightly forward, his posture alert, every step quiet and deliberate. Old habits never faded. His hand never strayed far from the knife on his belt. Mara followed a few paces behind him, not because she didn't trust him, but because survivors never walked side by side. That made ambushes too easy. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a scent neither of them had smelled in months. Salt. Mara lifted her head. Smell that? Rowan nodded without turning. The ocean. The word hung in the air between them. Mara's pace quickened slightly, not with excitement, but with something far more dangerous. Hope. For months, they had followed scattered rumors passed between traders, scavengers, and frightened survivors hiding in the ruins. A settlement near the coast, walls, food, doctors, electricity. Some people called it haven. Others called it a trap. Rowan didn't know which version to believe. But he knew one thing. Mara deserved more than endless highways and abandoned cities. They reached the outskirts of the coastal ruins 2 days later, or what remained of them. Skyscrapers leaned against one another like exhausted giants. Entire blocks had collapsed into piles of twisted steel and broken concrete. Years of salt air had accelerated the decay, and rust covered everything like a spreading infection. The ocean wind howled through hollow buildings, turning empty streets into a symphony of creaking metal and broken glass. Rowan stopped at the edge of the city. Something felt wrong. Mara noticed immediately. What is it? Rowan scanned the streets slowly. No fires. No scavengers. No bodies either. Mara frowned. That's good, isn't it? Rowan shook his head slowly. Not in a city this big. Silence settled between them. Mara quietly lifted her rifle. Meaning? Rowan exhaled. Meaning someone controls it. They moved through the streets carefully after that. Every shadow seemed deeper than it should have been. Every alley felt watched. Then they saw it. The wall rose from the harbor district like a scar across the city. It had been built from shipping containers, reinforced concrete slabs, welded scrap metal, and rusted steel beams. Watchtowers stood at each corner, silhouettes moving behind mounted rifles. Smoke rose from chimneys inside the walls. Life. Mara whispered, almost reverently. Haven. Rowan stared at the walls, unease settling heavily in his stomach. Civilization meant safety, but it also meant something else. Power. And power always found a way to rot. 2 guards met them at the gate. Both wore armor assembled from scavenged police gear and reinforced metal plates. Their rifles were clean and well maintained. That alone said a lot about the place. The taller guard stepped forward. His beard was streaked with gray, and his eyes carried the hard suspicion of someone who had survived too long to trust easily. State your business. Rowan kept his hands visible. We heard travelers could enter. The guard studied them carefully, his gaze lingering on Mara's rifle. You armed? Yes. You willing to surrender weapons inside the walls? Rowan hesitated. That request alone could determine whether they walked away or walked in. Mara spoke first. We'd consider it if we knew the rules. The guard smirked slightly. Smart answer. He stepped aside and nodded toward the gate. This is Haven. We have rules. Break them and you leave. 'Cause trouble and you don't. The metal gate creaked open slowly. Rowan and Mara stepped through together and entered the first real community either of them had seen in years. Inside the walls, Haven looked like a ghost of the old world. Solar panels covered rooftops. Rain collectors fed into large water tanks. Gardens grew where parking lots once stood. People moved through the streets carrying supplies, talking, arguing, laughing. Children ran between buildings. Rowan stopped walking. The sound of laughter hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't heard it in years. Mara stood beside him, equally stunned. Her eyes moved slowly across the settlement. A school building, a medical clinic, a small marketplace where people traded supplies. Life. Real life. First time seeing civilization again? The voice came from behind them. They turned. The man approaching them moved with relaxed confidence that immediately made Rowan uneasy. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark coat made from high-quality military fabric that had clearly been preserved carefully. His hair was neatly trimmed, too neat, too clean. His smile was easy, but his eyes were cold. "Welcome to Haven," he said smoothly. "I'm Marcus Vale, Settlement Administrator." Rowan recognized the type instantly. Every ruined world eventually produced men like him, leaders or tyrants. Sometimes the difference was small. Marcus extended his hand. Rowan shook it cautiously. "Rowan." Marcus turned toward Mara. "And you?" "Mara." Marcus studied her with sudden interest. Recognition flashed briefly in his eyes. "You're a medic." It wasn't a question. Mara stiffened. "How did you—" "Your hands," Marcus said lightly. "No labor calluses. Your pack has medical stitching. And you look at people the way doctors do." He smiled wider. "You're useful." Rowan didn't like the way he said that word. Marcus arranged temporary housing for them. A small apartment inside a refurbished office building. 2 rooms, a real bed, running water. Rowan stood at the sink staring at it for nearly a minute before turning the faucet. Clear water flowed out steadily. He hadn't seen that in years. Behind him, Mara sat on the edge of the bed. She looked overwhelmed. "Rowan," she whispered. "Yeah?" Her voice cracked slightly. "I think we made it." Rowan wanted to believe that, but Marcus Vale lingered in the back of his mind like a warning. 3 days passed. Mara began helping at Haven's medical clinic. Within hours, the entire settlement realized how skilled she was. She treated infections, set broken bones, diagnosed illnesses others couldn't understand. People lined up outside the clinic each morning. They called her doctor even when she tried to correct them. Rowan watched carefully. Mara looked different, alive in a way she hadn't been on the road. But Marcus Vale began visiting the clinic often, too often. And every time he looked at Mara, Rowan felt the same cold certainty settle in his chest. Marcus didn't see her as a person. He saw her as something valuable, something to own. Marcus invited Rowan to dinner a week later. A real meal waited on the table. Fresh fish, vegetables, bread. Marcus poured 2 glasses of salvaged wine. "Haven survives because of order," he said calmly. "Structure, rules, leadership." Rowan nodded slightly. "Seems to work." Marcus leaned forward. "And Mara?" Rowan's muscles tensed. "What about her?" Marcus smiled faintly. "She's valuable. Extremely valuable." Rowan said nothing. Marcus continued. "I want her to stay." Rowan's voice hardened. "That's her decision." Marcus shrugged. "Of course." A pause. Then quietly, "But valuable people attract attention." Rowan heard the threat hiding beneath the words. Over the next week, Rowan began noticing things he had missed before. Whispers in the streets, people who vanished quietly, guards who patrolled certain areas too heavily. Haven wasn't paradise. It was controlled. Marcus Vale ruled it with fear as much as leadership. One evening, Rowan stood on the roof with Mara watching the ocean burn red beneath the setting sun. "You trust him?" Rowan asked. Mara, "Yes." She hesitated. "Not entirely." "Why?" "Because people here are scared of him. In a world where trusting someone could cost you everything. Would you choose to survive alone? Or risk it all for the chance to not be alone anymore?"